For a lot of us, the world can feel like a really chaotic place. There are so many things happening all over the world, all at once. And with cable news and the internet and social media, we have access to all of it. And while there are a lot of good things peppered in there, so much of the information we get can feel big and heavy and weighty, which is why, for many of us, the preferred way to consume information about the world is with a dose of humor. Well, our guest today specializes in just that. He is a comedian, he's an actor, he's a journalist, and he's an Emmy-nominated producer. Please welcome Roy Wood Jr.
Thank you, Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, Roy, a lot of people know you as a comedian who sometimes plays a journalist on TV, but you actually do, speaking of your academic background, you actually do have a background in journalism, both in terms of your lineage, your father was a legendary journalist, and your own education. Can you, to start us off, maybe tell us more about that background and how it influences the way you define yourself as a comedian and also as a storyteller?
I grew up, my father was a civil rights journalist. My father, if it was black and it was strife, he was embedded there. So we're going all the way back to Soweto riots. He got shot at by snipers. He was embedded in Vietnam with predominantly black platoons. He was part of the civil rights movement. He was in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, covering that civil war. So, my father has always been a person that has just always tried to find what's wrong and at least be a bullhorn for what was happening. And so I grew up watching the local news. Every night, my dad would watch the local news and yell at it. My dad would yell at the news the way people yell at football. I'm not going to sit here and act like this is the family business. I mean, I have a lot of journalists in my family, but I wanted to be a firefighter, man. I wanted to be a firefighter. And then I saw Stuart Scott and I wanted to do sports. I wanted to be funny. I wanted to be Jenny Moose. I wanted to be Kenny Mayne. Those are the people that I looked up to. And then once somewhere I got into my 30s, I caught myself yelling at the television. And I just time to change my comedy.
Well, it is true, right? Like so much of comedy comes from some frustration with the things that are happening in the world, often in a really small, insignificant way. But it comes from that same, why is it like this? Question that other people don't seem to be paying attention to often.
Yeah. And I think that was part of the shift to journalism. And then just what happened is that I started stand-up when I was 19. So I didn't really have a lot to say. All my jokes were about book buyback and your roommate eating your food. But once I turned that corner around my late 20s into my early 30s, I started taking a little bit of a more journalistic approach to what we were taught at Florida A&M was, what is the thing you can say about this topic that hasn't been said yet or that you wish could be said? And so that became kind of the same North Star for me comedically. And I mean, honestly, to me, comedy is journalism. It's just, you're just reporting on either what's happening to you personally or what's happening to all of us collectively. It's not that different, And I think once you're in a truthful space, then you have an opportunity to truly connect with people. And that's just what it's been. I wish I could tell you that this was some deliberate arc from when the first time I saw Sinbad on the HBO free preview weekend in the 90s. And no, I enjoyed getting up in a room full of strangers and just accepting the challenge of trying to make them laugh. And the things that became of worth to me became very important. And then I had a child. And then it became very serious about, okay, well, what am I trying to say? What the hell am I talking about? Let's actually let's structure something here.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that because, Father Figure and Imperfect Messenger, two of your comedy specials, which are two of my favorite comedy specials of all time. They both open with you talking to your son. So how did having a kid change the way that you think about comedy and change maybe the responsibility of having a platform and people paying attention to you?
A lot of it, if I'm being honest, is just me leaving breadcrumbs of knowledge for him for when he's older in case I'm not here. That's really a lot of what it is. It's me it's the general public getting to witness me leave messages to my child.
Hmm.
That's kind of what my career is starting to turn into. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And it's not from a play. And I don't say that in some morbid sense of die tomorrow, but it is essentially important to me to make sure that the lessons, and my father died when I was 16. And I think that's also part of why I'm wired like this now, because there are certain lessons and things that I just wasn't, it wasn't time for those conversations when
Hmm.
I was a teenager. So the things that I really hope that he understands about himself and the world, let me start putting that stuff out there in the world now, comedically a little bit. And I just think infusing him just a little bit kind of creates that through line of, who it is I'm actually talking to without it being, nail on the head. There's
Hmm.
just certain, it's also part of why in my stand up, I don't talk, at least I try not to talk about specific people. And part of that is because, for 7 years on the Daily Show, that's what we do. We talk about people. And I want to talk about issues and
Hmm.
feelings because the issues will tend to still be there as the people affecting or disaffecting those issues come and go. It's always the people trying to change the issue is a revolving door, but the issue remains the issue.
So there's a question from one of the audience members, Susan, and I think this really relates exactly to what you're saying, which is how can you use humor as a tool to bring up those difficult issues or questions?
I think that it's about figuring out a way to find the common denominator between people. So when I started doing stand up, again as a teenager, if you're trying to do comedy every week in the South, and I'm from Birmingham, I was in school in Tallahassee, so those are my two comedy bases. But if you're in Biloxi, you're at the casinos performing for retirees. If you're in Florida, down on the lower East Coast, it's Latino heavy, redneck heavy on the Gulf Coast side. You could be doing an urban night in Atlanta. You could be doing a mainstream night in Nashville. So what I hated was always having to change up my jokes and change up everything. Whereas if I could figure out the things that connect us, then I'd never have to change no matter where I am.
Hmm.
Like you can find certain topics that, and I don't mean that from a divisive versus non-divisive place, but I just mean it for the things that we're passionate about. If you start in a general place, it's food, it's love, it's entertainment, and some sort of form of employment or provision, making money, the thing that emotionally fulfills you, right?
Hmm.
So what I what I what I started doing was trying to do material that was rooted in one of those things. We all love a food. We all desire emotion or have experienced heartbreak. We all desire, even if it's not employment, if you just want to go hike, what's the thing you want to? So if I share my emotion and my passion for something, then in theory, these people should be connected with me because they have a similar want.
Hmm.
So if you find a way to connect people in the beginning of a conversation, then they are more open to receiving humor. Like
Yeah,
it's not you can't just joke. You have to come in from some level and degree of understanding.
totally.
I think that for as long as people understand your intentions, then humor is not the tightrope that we think it to be.
Especially when people are starting out in comedy, they try and make these really general jokes that are often kind of overwritten or overthought. And I find that often the things that make people laugh the most are just the most honest, the truest thing you can say, the most vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's at least for me, that has been a big revelation in on stage, is to realize like you can bring your full self, and that thing that you're so worried about sharing actually is what other people want to hear and will connect with the
Yeah.
most.
And so now the best jokes land in one of two places. It's either the audience absorbs it as, wow, I didn't know that, or I didn't look at it like that. Or
Mm.
it's, that's what I've been trying to say.
Yeah.
And so if you hit either of those nerves, then anything you do after that, the people they're all
Uh-huh.
You get up in front of a boring room and you acknowledge, hey, yeah, I know this is boring. Let's hurry up and let's go. Let's do it. Like if you acknowledge the obvious. So I spoke at the National Association of Black Journalists conference in
Mm.
Birmingham earlier this year, and it's an average 1 p.m. fluorescent light stage I call it circle table events, the circle
Uh-huh.
table banquet, whatever,
Uh-huh.
right?
A challenge.
Yes. But which and it's gigs like that that prepared me for the White House correspondent. You do
Yeah,
20
which I want
years,
to talk about.
you do 20 years of circle tables. You're ready for the DC circle table, the Super Bowl of circle tables. But at that event, the first thing I acknowledged was, yeah, thank you all for coming to Birmingham. I know it sucks because there's no Uber Black, which is a true statement. Birmingham, my hometown, I can say this. Uber X is a 20-minute wait. And if you're coming from LA or Chicago, if you're coming from a 5-minute Uber city, then that's a tough thing to stomach and deal with. Um, so you acknowledge that, and then you're able to get into things that are a little tougher and a little harder to digest, and often things that a lot of people don't want to laugh at or do not find funny.
Yeah. Lourdes in Mexico is saying that comedy is underrated around the world, but it's truly a tool for mental health. And I really agree in the sense too that like something that I've always admired about your comedy from the first time that I saw you is that you are able to talk about really heavy, serious stuff in a way that's hilarious, but you're also not afraid to talk about the light, just goofy, absurd stuff too. You have a mix of both, and that's such a joy to watch on stage.
Comedians, because we are of this craft, we are a little more, I don't know if encrusted is the word. I don't know. It's not salmon, but we're hardened, calcified. There you go. We're galvanized emotionally. So things don't hit us as hard right away.
Mm.
It's just funny to me. And it's weird and it's observant. Like I've been talking about on stage to mixed reviews that I know white people are going through stuff because they're showing up, in full fatigues to protest at Disney World. Like it's 90 degrees, bro. There's better attire. You want to protest, like say what you want about the Klan, but at least the robe was nice and breathable. And so that's, it feels pro Klan, but it's not. It's pro. So it's stuff like that where you make that joke. Now we can get into the deeper topic of white supremacy. And now we can get into something a little more weird because we made the kind of weird, obvious joke that you would have never thought about. But like, oh yeah, the Klan, yeah, they never did. They wore loose stuff because they didn't want to die of heat stroke. So it's fun. To me, it's fun to find those lines and those edges.
There's a question from Gretchen that I think is a really important one, which is when we're talking about creating that understanding of your intentions, how do you create that understanding with the audience when you're making a joke that is on the line or that could be kind of interpreted in different ways? Because it does seem like many times there's a risk of people kind of filling in the blanks and thinking, as Gretchen put it, that there could be a simplistic assumption about you as a person based on your gender, age, residence, political affiliation. So how do you get to the real understanding of what your actual intention is with the audience?
I think that comes just in time within the duration of the performance. So, one thing for me that I have to work on, and a lot of this goes back to psychology. I used to watch this show on Nat Geo called Brain Games. And they brought it back in a couple different iterations now. I think it's more of a game showy thing now with Keegan Michael Key. But in the earliest iterations of the show, it just showed you how the human mind works. And so I enjoyed this show because it talked about how something as simple as a smile before you say something versus a smile after you say something, and how those change two different. It literally changes the intention of it. If you smile first, then say it, it seems sinister. But if you say it to feel sinister, then smile at the back end, it's like, come on, I'm being it. There's a way to kind of yo-yo a little bit, and then sometimes, be bold and just say what it is you're thinking. And it might be a smile on the back end. It might be something a little more we were talking about Mike Pence, and this was This was during when Daily Show when we were still on, and it was a joke we were thinking about doing for my guest hosting week, wherein essentially the argument I was trying to make was that of all of the current presidential candidates, Mike Pence is the most confident because he has to get people who try to kill him to vote for him. And so that could work on stage, but in the context of television, in the context of structure, there are people who would legitimately believe that what I'm saying is serious. And there are people who would pull that little bite and put that up on whatever website and go, Roy Wood Jr. endorses Mike Pence. And then on the liberal side, there's people who will see that link or see that headline, not click it, and then assume the worst of me. So a lot of it also comes down to understanding the medium through which you're communicating the thing.
You know, I also think that some of this feels like because you are very much not in overnight success, right? It wasn't like one day you were at an open mic and the next day you were on the Daily Show. Instead, you had worked your way up through clubs, you had been on radio, you had been on television shows, and then you had this big, huge platform. I feel like one thing that is really true, and I'm curious if it feels like this for you, but you have, to me, felt like someone who has a really clear sense of himself and his voice and what he's willing to say or not say. And I think that really comes across to an audience as well. Does it feel like that to you internally?
It does now, but it didn't for like 15 years. Like you can go back and watch, it's still up online. You can go back and watch my old Conan O'Brien sets from 2011 through 24. There was a stretch in my career where Conan O'Brien was the only person who would put me on TV. Every other show said no. Any other show that I'd already done would not have me back. For whatever reason, I'm not talking trash, but facts. Conan O'Brien was the only person who would book me and put me on television. And you can see the evolution over those 4 or 5 years of Conan sets. And that was kind of where I started turning the corner on talking about race relations in this country, and that being a little bit more of an integral part of what I wanted to talk about on stage. That's where I probably really started, to turn that corner a little bit. And now it's definitely pronounced. It's clear. I know what I want to do. The next hour special it's about all of the men other than my father who influenced me after his death. This idea of manhood and fatherhood and masculinity. And then realizing I have a plethora of stories, some funny, some moving, some, I'm a comedian. I have been very close to comics that have killed themselves. Many of them I knew. So this idea of all of these different life lessons, where did I get those from?
Well, I want to actually talk about some of my favorite jokes that sound like they're kind of more in the past from you. But, I always think that one of the highest compliments that I can give to a comedian is that they have a joke that I think about for the rest of my life. You've changed the way that I will think about seeing an object or being in a situation. And you have a bunch of these. You have some of my most just secondhand described jokes where we're in a situation and I say, oh, you have to watch this Roy Wood Jr. joke about this. And one of them is forever now, anytime I see an oversized American flag, I always think about your incredible joke about the math of American flags.
And how many American flags equal a Confederate flag? There's too many flags in one place. I don't feel comfortable.
It's so funny. And I just constantly think about you describing it as like there's the residue of racism, that too many American flags, you can feel that it has a different message.
It's not blatantly racist, but I'm watching you. This says a lot. There's too many effing flags. Yeah, but I mean, like a joke like that just comes from driving in the South for 500,000 miles.
Absolutely.
I've driven every freeway and state road. I've seen the big garrison flags when you come into town, and there's something really good and prideful about it. And then I've also been in, some corner store where there's a bunch of "don't tread on me" and all, like it's interesting. It's very interesting. And And to me, that's not even, and that's a joke where, in a way, if you love the flag and you're not racist, how can I thread this so you'll laugh at it too? Because this isn't about your love of the flag. This is how, when there's too many flags on the same street, how it makes me feel. And
Mm,
I'm not saying it is racist. I'm just saying this. Hmm, hmm. Like even the thing I talked about in Father Figure
yeah.
about how I like the Confederate flag, but
Yeah.
it's I would rather know where you stand in your racism than for you to be covert with it.
Yep.
That's and it's just a broader statement about society. I would much rather it's like that. It's like the discussion just about down south racism versus up north racism, and how it's very polite, and up northerners are very prejudiced, but it's not in your face. Where in the south it's just straight up, no, stay over there, don't even, this is a sundown town, and I want you to know that. Like there's
It,
no northern sundown towns.
well, I think it's such a, that joke from Father Figure is such a perfect way of getting at something that is really nuanced about this conversation around history and symbols, right? Of like that, that you're pro Confederate flag, not because of the memory of the Confederacy, but because it lets you know who feels that way. And
It's
you,
information.
something that you worked on that is one of, I absolutely love this documentary. You were an executive producer on a documentary called The Neutral Ground. And that is made by this incredible filmmaker, C.J. Hunt. And
Yeah.
it's about the fight to remove Confederate monuments. And it looks at a really serious, very sobering issue, but in a hilarious way. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
since that is so much of, you have this family history of being involved in the civil rights struggle. And now you yourself, you have this big platform and you are using it to talk about some of these same issues. So I'd love to kind of get into that idea of how humor can be a way to confront history and why it might actually be a powerful way to do that.
I think I think we're past yelling at each other to get anybody to understand where you're coming from. If the last 8 years of politics have proven nothing more, it has proven that two people screaming at each other is not going to get anything done. We live in our own information bubbles as well, but I think one of the things that made George Carlin so amazing was that he could get you to laugh at something even if you didn't agree with him. And I think that's always been the same approach. So CJ Hunt, who directed and made this film, CJ and I met at the Daily Show. He was a field director, and before that, he was working over at Robin Thede. So he was already in that groove of looking at humor from The Rundown with Robin Thede, which was also like a political satire vehicle over at BET. And so this idea of, if I can get you to laugh at it, then I can get you to listen. And so you want to find jokes, even if they're on yourself, or even if the jokes are at the expense of yourself. And I think the thing that was what I respected about CJ's approach to the neutral ground was that it didn't come necessarily from a place of attacking the people who believed and defended the monument. It was simply an exploration into why. What is it that makes you feel this? Now, what if I told you this, this, and this about history, and that everything you've been sold since Reconstruction was propaganda and a lie? The Mothers of the Confederacy spun half of this stuff and got these monuments up. Like, this wasn't even supposed to be so exploring it from that place instead of chastising people who want to defend all of that, and there were still parts of that documentary that got very real for CJ. He went to Charlottesville, and I don't think anyone predicted that Charlottesville would have become, such a lightning rod point, because there have been so many Charlottesvilles before. There's just so many other, we're going to show up and protest and yell at each other from across the street incidents. And Charlottesville was one that went off the rails. And even in that, you sit in the real feelings and the horror of that, and you're still able to use humor to come out on the other side. And, I think that, for the people that are looking at this, especially like in the professional sector, where you're trying to use humor and you're trying to use something lighthearted to go into issues that are serious within your companies or within your personal life, you don't have to joke on the issue. The issue itself is not funny. But how did we get here? That's funny. The causation. Who are the people responsible for the causation? Or who are the people that are fighting to change this? There's humor in that. Who are the people fighting against change? Who are the people fighting for change? And I think if you look in those areas around an issue, you're always going to find fertile ground. So you're always going to find something on the outer rings that is worthy of satire or observation. And even if it has to wait a day, you wait a day. But, there's always going to be, when you look back, I look back, and Trevor Noah had the unfortunate task of hosting the Daily Show pretty much every time an unarmed cop killing footage got released. It was a show week. And so, this idea of figuring out where the humor is in that, and the humor is not in the tragedy, it's in the bureaucracy around it. So I just think when you look at it that way, then you're able to find pockets where you can jab a joke real quick and get in and get out. It doesn't have to be hilarious all the way through, but you definitely want, as best you can, to try and use humor. I just think it's a better way, of doing things.
So for people who are listening, who, they see the power of humor, they see the power of comedy, but they're not professional comedians, that they don't necessarily think of themselves that way. What tips would you give them for trying to successfully land a joke without offending people?
I think if it's about trying to find humor without offending, I don't think that place truly exists. I think that you can try to make it as offense proof as possible. So the first thing you have to do is let go of the fact that someone is or isn't going to be offended. Or you delve in the four, as I call it, the four safety corners. Like, food is never offending it, not to the point of war. Maybe on Twitter, if I go on Twitter and go, I hate this food, then a bunch of people, but you can still show up to work the next day. You're not going to get sent to HR because you said you didn't like macaroni with breadcrumbs, which, by the way, is not the way to do macaroni. Please stop putting breadcrumbs in macaroni and stop truffling everything. I'm getting off topic.
Oh, people are furious. The comments are going off right now. People are furious about that.
I see the emojis floating up. Stop truffling everything. I said it. There's no reason. Everything doesn't have to taste like a fart. Only pasta. So if you're not attacking a person or an ideology or a group of people, you're generally in a safe place. If you are not attacking a particular reason why something happened. Also, don't make jokes based on assumptions of the truth of why you think someone did something, because what we also live in is a correction culture. And so people are quick to go, well, the reason why that actually happened. So if you go, he did that because this, and joke. Well, someone who doesn't believe that premise, Mike Birbiglia said it best. Everybody has to agree on the premise before we'll agree on to laugh at the punchline. And I think that's what we've lost as of late. But if we're just talking short answer, rapid fire, food, entertainment, love, and money, like job, employment. If you stay in those four pockets, it's going to be hard to offend someone. But if you're determined to make the edgier joke, just know that somebody might not like it, especially if it's at the expense of another group.
Well, a lot of people in the audience here are asking some version of this question. This is one of the most common things that people want to know about comedy these days. I find it's like, but what, aren't you afraid of being canceled? Aren't you afraid of what will happen if people take it the wrong way? So how do you think about that?
I don't think about jokes being taken the wrong way. I can't concern myself with that. My job is to write the joke that I think is funny and perform it for the people who want to laugh. Now, I exist in a different space because I'm not at a company where I can be written up. I can't be sent to HR at a comedy club. All that happens is that people either show up or they don't show up. And at the end of the day, I think that people vote with their wallets and their remote controls. And so if there's people that still love you, they're going to come see you. And so those are the people that you do it for. And you ultimately cannot, if you're constantly performing, to not piss off a group of people, then who are you? Because now you're constantly altering yourself to public ideologies. And to me, that's a very dangerous and uncreative place to be, because now you're trying to be creatively a la carte for whatever the moods are at that particular time. And if you're that, then at what point are you ever yourself?
The thing, though, that I wonder about is, how do you balance the authenticity and the courage to say something that you believe in, regardless of consequences, with the ability to stay open to valid critiques about places where you're getting it wrong or you haven't thought it through all the way? Because it seems like a lot of times people take any criticism as an attack and shutting it down rather than an opportunity to grow. So how do you balance those?
Nuance has been removed from the conversation. I've always welcomed, critique and criticism, but then critique and criticism also has to come from a place of not trying to completely chop somebody's head off. And I think I'm one of the few comedians that reads their YouTube comments. I know you shouldn't, but YouTube and Reddit are by far the most comprehensive and fair critiques of any forms of entertainment, in my opinion. Better than Facebook, better than Twitter, all of that, because like Twitter and Facebook, like that's all engagement and arguing in the comments. Like it's performative. I consider that outrage performative. Whereas if you're typing a Reddit thread, you don't know who's going to see this. Only 4 people might see this. Or a million. Like that's from the heart. I just don't think that you can. I don't think that you can truly say you're evolving as a performer if you're not looking at how some of the material is making people feel. Whether you adjust to it or not is up to you. But what I do not like is the retroactive cancellation of, oh, here's something that you said from 15 years ago at a time where society was different, and I will judge it now based on current societal standards and attack you as if you just said it yesterday. That I'm not cool with. I think that's a little bit of if we want to acknowledge the past and apologize and get past it, cool. But
totally. And also, any good performer, any person that you want to spend time with, hopefully they've grown and changed and improved, And
I think that should be part of that assessment. When you find the old clip on person, let's also take a look at their arc from that time until now. I do think that jokes have real effects. Like I think it's naive to think that you can make a joke and speak truth to power and the establishment and the government will change with this joke. And then also not think that you could write a joke that could destroy somebody and make them feel inhumane.
We've been talking about how it's important to have a thick skin to be a comic. And yet many artists and many creative people are really sensitive. And that's key to tapping into their creativity. So what advice do you have for people who are artists or creative people who want to be more comfortable getting that feedback, who want to get to the place where maybe they could read their Reddit comments or their YouTube comments, but they feel like they aren't there yet?
Find a person you love and read their YouTube comments and see the hate and just you're going to be amazed at how could someone not like that project or that movie. What's a movie you love? Go read some reviews. It's all got haters. And once you see that, it'll help normalize it a little bit for you. And you'll know that what you are doing is not that different. And that's just all part of the path. I know some people don't like hate, and it's also very different for women, which is something that I learned from talking with a lot of women comics in the industry. That is, what I've benefited from is that most any insult that I fielded has been a critique of my art. It wasn't a death threat. It wasn't my looks. It was, things of that nature. So, by all means, I wouldn't say immerse yourself into anything that's triggering or your own traumas. But if you can, as best you can, look and assess the things that you love and just see that none of it is infallible. It all gets insulted. It all gets critiqued by people who can't do it, who don't know what they're doing. And once you understand that that's part of the process, then you're able to trust what you're doing and just find your audience. Find the people who like you. That's all you got to do.
Well, let's go and talk about the White House Correspondents' Dinner for a second, because you hosted it this year, and you're directly talking to the most powerful people in the country, and I'm curious what jokes you were proudest of that you got to say in that setting.
I had 6 or 7 writers working with me on this. Former Daily Show, former Nightly Show, all worth their weight in the political satire sphere. And we were constantly changing everything. I had a whole 5-minute spy balloon chunk. And by the time we got to the dinner, no one cared about spy balloons anymore. It was just we made it a throwaway joke, and it worked. But the Clarence Thomas NFT joke still makes me laugh, and saying that we can see him, but he's owned by someone else, and that's what an NFT is. Which, considering that people call Clarence Thomas a token Black guy, and NFT also means token, and they thought that I was also, that was like a happy accident where people were like, oh yeah, you called him a token, like an NFT, a token. I was like, yes, I did.
Yes.
Absolutely. That was the intention. You caught that.
Well, Roy, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And congratulations on all of your degrees. It's really impressive.
Well, yes, thank you. I worked very hard at them with Sharpies.